The battle for Astra 9 was far from over. But the arrival of the vanguard had changed everything. For the first time in a long time, humanity had hope. And with that hope, they would fight back. The dust had barely settled from the destruction of Astra 9 when the true battle began. The Empire's massive fleet hovered over the planet, its warships and robotic soldiers working together in a well-coordinated attack. They had crushed the human defenses effortlessly, and now, they aimed to finish what they had started, total annihilation. But what the Empire didn't know was that they had underestimated humanity's resilience. Out of nowhere, the vanguard appeared. It was cloaked, hidden from the Empire's advanced sensors. The ship moved swiftly through the smoke-filled sky, almost like a ghost, silently maneuvering behind the Empire's fleet. The vanguard's crew, led by Captain Alara Grant, knew the situation was dire. But this was their chance. The vanguard wasn't just a ship, it was humanity's last hope, and they weren't going to let it fall without a fight. Captain Grant issued the order, and with deadly precision, the vanguard unleashed its first strike. The ship's energy weapons glowed brightly, sending precise plasma bursts at one of the Empire's warships. The burst hit the warship's shields, which flickered and weakened under the attack. Then, a second blast pierced the weakened shields, causing the warship to explode in a fiery ball. The massive explosion sent shockwaves through the sky, and the crew of the vanguard could hear the cheers of their fellow soldiers. But they didn't have time to celebrate. The Empire's fleet was already reacting. For a moment, there was confusion among the Empire's forces. The warship sensors could no longer track the vanguard, and its cloaking technology rendered the ship practically invisible. The AI-controlled warships, usually precise in their movements, began to turn in circles, searching for a target they could no longer see. They were used to hunting down enemies that were predictable, that followed the same patterns. But the vanguard didn't follow any pattern. It moved like a shadow, disappearing and reappearing, outsmarting the Empire at every turn. The Empire's robotic soldiers, programmed for efficiency, were also thrown off. They had been designed to take on conventional forces, not an unpredictable human ship that appeared and vanished at will. Their mechanical minds were overwhelmed by the sudden shift in the battlefield. They couldn't predict where the next strike would come from. The robotic forces began firing blindly, while their human commanders struggled to regain control of the situation. Inside the vanguard, human soldiers were already preparing for close-quarters combat. These soldiers weren't just soldiers, they were survivors. Trained for every possible situation, they knew they had to make every second count. As the robotic soldiers of the Empire advanced, the human crew prepared for a brutal fight. The soldiers aboard the vanguard engaged the Empire's robotic forces in intense hand-to-hand combat. The clashing of metal and the whirring of mechanical limbs filled the corridors of the ship. The robots were strong, their punches powerful, but the human soldiers had one advantage: their resourcefulness. They fought with grit, using their surroundings to their advantage. When a robot tried to grab a soldier, it was met with a quick strike to its joints, forcing it to malfunction. When another robot charged, it was taken down by a blast of close-range plasma fire from a human soldier's rifle. The battle inside the vanguard was chaotic, but the humans fought with determination. They knew they couldn't afford to lose. The fate of Astra 9, and perhaps the entire galaxy, depended on their victory. Outside, the vanguard continued its assault on the Empire's fleet. The ship's advanced weaponry, still a mystery to the Empire, was proving to be a game-changer. Each plasma burst was calculated and precise, striking the weak points in the Empire's ships with deadly accuracy. The vanguard wasn't just attacking randomly, it was picking off targets one by one, causing chaos among the Empire's fleet. A warship's shields would flicker, then collapse under the barrage, sending the ship spiraling down to the surface below. The day began like any other. Children played in the streets, families went about their daily routines, and the local markets bustled with activity. The people of Astra 9 had no idea that a storm was approaching, one that would change everything. Suddenly, without any warning, the sky above the peaceful colony was torn apart by the deafening sound of massive ships entering the atmosphere. It was the Galactic Empire's elite fleet, and they had arrived with a single purpose: to destroy. The Empire's elite fleet, a force of terror. The fleet was massive, its ships unlike anything the humans had ever seen. They were enormous warships, their black hulls gleaming under the light of the distant star. The ships had an eerie, intimidating look, and they seemed to stretch endlessly across the sky. These were no ordinary ships, they were AI-controlled, with weapons that could level entire cities in seconds. As the ships descended, they released robotic soldiers into the streets, their cold, metal limbs clanging as they marched. These machines were programmed for one thing: destruction. They didn't care about mercy or negotiation. They were here to wipe out every living being in their path. The humans on Astra 9 were caught completely off guard. There were no warnings, no time to prepare. The colony had no defenses capable of stopping such a powerful force. The people scattered in fear, some running to their homes, others rushing toward underground shelters. But there was nowhere to hide from the Empire's wrath. Within moments, the Empire began its attack. The warships fired powerful blasts down onto the surface, and the peaceful city of Astra 9 was instantly plunged into chaos. Buildings exploded in fiery bursts, sending debris flying in all directions. Roads cracked and crumbled under the force of the bombardment. The Empire's robotic soldiers marched through the wreckage, firing on anything that moved. The colony's defense forces tried to respond, but it was hopeless. They had only basic laser cannons and a few shield generators, but the Empire's fleet was far superior. The laser cannons fired uselessly into the sky, unable to penetrate the shields of the warships above. The few soldiers who tried to put up a fight were quickly overrun by the robotic soldiers that flooded the streets. People screamed as they ran for cover, but there was nowhere to escape. The Empire was relentless. Buildings that had once been homes and schools were now reduced to rubble. The people of Astra 9 were helpless, facing an overwhelming force with no way to fight back. Inside the command center, Captain Alara Grant, a veteran of past battles, stood in front of a large display screen. Her face was grim as she watched the destruction unfold. She had seen many battles in her life, but nothing like this. Astra 9 was different. This was home for thousands of innocent civilians, and now it was being torn apart by the Empire. The Empire's once confident fleet was now in disarray. The warships that had seemed unstoppable just hours ago were now vulnerable. The robotic soldiers that had marched through Astra 9 with ease were now on the defensive, unable to adapt to the human tactics. For the first time, the Empire was facing a force it couldn't control, a force that fought with cunning, resourcefulness, and a will to survive. But as the tide of battle began to turn, the Empire's leader, Admiral Creel, grew furious. He had been certain that the Empire's overwhelming technological superiority would be enough to crush this tiny human rebellion. But now, a single human ship, cloaked and unpredictable, had caused a disruption the likes of which he had never seen before. He slammed his fist on the console in front of him, his face twisted in rage. "Where is that ship?" he shouted, his voice cold and dangerous. "Find it. Hunt it down. We will not let these humans have a single victory." His officers scrambled to follow his orders, but it wasn't easy. They could still not track the Vanguard with their sensors. The human ship had become a nightmare, elusive, quick, and deadly. Admiral Creel could feel his anger boiling. He wasn't used to being outsmarted, especially by humans. "Set all ships to hunt down the Vanguard," Creel ordered, his voice now laced with cold determination. "I want that ship destroyed, now." With Admiral Creel's command, the Empire's fleet tightened its formation, preparing to overwhelm the Vanguard with sheer numbers. The AI-controlled warships coordinated their movements, hoping to corner the human ship and destroy it once and for all. The robotic soldiers were now deployed in even greater numbers, flooding every inch of the planet's surface. The Empire wasn't just angry, they were desperate. But the humans aboard the Vanguard weren't afraid. They knew they had only one shot at turning the tide. They had to keep moving, keep fighting, and never give up. With Captain Grant's leadership and the bravery of every soldier aboard, the Vanguard continued its relentless assault, determined to prove that human ingenuity could overcome even the most advanced technology. The visuals of the battle were nothing short of cinematic. Above, the Vanguard darted between the towering warships of the Empire, firing plasma blasts that lit up the sky. Each burst of light was followed by the explosion of an enemy ship, sending debris flying in all directions. On the ground, human soldiers fought valiantly against the relentless robotic forces, their weapons flashing brightly in the chaos. The once peaceful world of Astra 9 was now a battlefield, its sky filled with the sounds of war. In the midst of the destruction, something incredible was happening. The Empire, despite its technological superiority, was losing its grip on the battlefield. And humanity, against all odds, was showing the universe that it was not to be underestimated. The battle had raged on for what seemed like an eternity, with the Vanguard narrowly escaping countless dangers and taking down one Empire warship after another. But the time had come for humanity's greatest move, the moment when everything would be decided. The Empire's fleet had been scattered, but their most formidable force, the flagship, still remained. If the Vanguard could take it down, the Empire's entire strategy would crumble. Captain Alara Grant stood at the helm of the Vanguard, her eyes fixed on the massive, imposing flagship of the Empire. She had seen what it was capable of. This was no ordinary ship. It was a symbol of the Empire's might, a fortress in space, protected by layers of shields and dozens of powerful warships. But Grant knew that there was one thing the Empire couldn't account for: humanity's unyielding spirit and resourcefulness. With the cloaking device activated, the Vanguard slipped through the Empire's defenses, unseen and undetected. The technology that had once seemed like a dream was now humanity's greatest weapon. As the ship neared the flagship's docking bay, tension rippled through the crew. Every second was critical, and every mistake could mean certain death. Captain Grant's voice echoed through the ship's intercom. "Prepare to board. The mission is clear, take down the reactor. Everything else will follow." The crew of the Vanguard had been trained for high-stakes missions, but this was unlike any battle they had faced before. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting for their freedom, for the future of humanity. They were about to strike the killing blow against the Empire's most powerful weapon. As the Vanguard hovered silently near the docking bay, Captain Grant led her team to the airlock. There, the team activated a specialized cloaking mechanism that made them invisible even to the Empire's most advanced sensors. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows as they infiltrated the flagship's dark corridors. The atmosphere inside the flagship was cold and oppressive. The team moved with precision, avoiding patrols of robotic soldiers and armed Empire troops. Their target, the main reactor, deep inside the heart of the flagship. The reactor's power sustained the entire ship, and its destruction would cripple the vessel and send shockwaves through the entire Empire's fleet. Each step was calculated. With their cloaking devices keeping them hidden, the crew approached the reactor room. The closer they got, the more they felt the weight of their mission pressing on them. The flagship was enormous, and every section seemed to be more heavily guarded than the last. But this was their moment, and there was no turning back. As they reached the reactor room, the tension in the air grew thicker. The entrance was guarded, but the team was ready. Using their advanced weapons and technology, they incapacitated the guards without making a sound. There was no time for hesitation. Captain Grant moved forward, planting the explosive charges on the reactor's core. "Get ready," she whispered into the comms. "Once this blows, the Empire's fleet will be nothing but ashes." Just as she finished placing the final charge, alarms blared. The cloaking technology had been breached. The Empire knew they were here. "Go! Go! Go!" Captain Grant shouted as she activated the detonator. The moment the explosive charges hit the reactor, the flagship seemed to shudder as if in disbelief. The energy within the reactor exploded in a blinding flash, sending ripples of destruction through the entire ship. The massive shockwave tore through the flagship's hull, and the ship's core exploded with terrifying force. The once impenetrable fortress of the Empire began to crumble, piece by piece. A flicker of light appeared on the edge of the battlefield, just beyond the reach of the Empire's sensors. It was a single ship, a small dot on the radar at first, barely noticeable among the massive fleet. But there was something different about this ship. It wasn't like the others. It wasn't part of the Empire's invasion force. The ship appeared and disappeared in an instant, moving with a speed and grace that was impossible for any human vessel to achieve. It was as though it was cloaked, hidden from view, its presence barely detectable. The human soldiers, still clinging to life in their bunkers, stared in awe as the mysterious ship danced around the Empire's forces, dodging blasts and taking down enemy warships with devastating precision. The Vanguard, a ship like no other. The ship that had appeared out of nowhere was called the Vanguard. Its sleek, dark hull shimmered with a strange energy, and its weapons fired with pinpoint accuracy, cutting through the Empire's advanced warships like a knife through butter. Each shot from the Vanguard sent shockwaves through the Empire's fleet, causing several ships to explode in brilliant flashes of light. It was a beacon of hope. Captain Grant's heart skipped a beat as she realized what was happening. The ship wasn't just any human vessel. It was the Vanguard, a top-secret, experimental ship developed by a clandestine human military project. This ship was unlike anything humanity had ever built. It was equipped with cutting-edge technology, a nearly invisible cloaking device, advanced AI-controlled navigation systems, and weapons capable of taking down the most advanced alien ships. It had been thought lost in a previous battle, its existence buried in classified files. But now, against all odds, it had reappeared. The human crew of the Vanguard was led by Captain Alara Grant's old comrade, Captain Tobias Locke. He was a man of few words, but his reputation as a brilliant tactician and fearless leader was known throughout the military. His mission had always been clear: protect humanity at all costs. And now, he had returned, bringing with him the last hope for Astra 9. As the Vanguard continued to fight, taking down ship after ship, the Empire's Admiral Creel began to take notice. His face twisted in anger as he watched his fleet crumble under the relentless assault of this unknown human ship. His AI advisors told him that the ship was a fluke, a mere distraction, but he knew better. There was something about this ship, something about the human spirit, that defied logic. Captain Grant, who had been observing the battle from the command center, watched in stunned silence. The sound of her own breath was the only thing she could hear. This ship, this Vanguard, was their salvation. With its presence, the humans had a chance to win, even against the most formidable force the galaxy had ever known. For the first time since the Empire's arrival, the human defenders began to regain their confidence. Soldiers who had been cowering in fear now raised their heads. The hope that had been extinguished moments before flickered back to life. Captain Grant knew this was the turning point. The Empire's fleet was still enormous, and the fight was far from over. But the Vanguard had given them the opening they needed. This was their chance to strike back. With a steady hand, she made her decision. Prepare to launch the counteroffensive, she ordered. The fate of Astra 9, and perhaps all of humanity, would now rest on this one human ship. Astra 9 was a quiet planet far from the center of galactic conflict. The humans who lived here had created a peaceful life. The colony was surrounded by lush forests, clear rivers, and fields full of green crops. The air was fresh, and the sky was always blue. It was a place where people could escape from the chaos of the galaxy and simply live their lives. But that peace was about to be shattered in a way no one could have predicted. Outside, the spectacle was nothing short of breathtaking. The destruction of the flagship sent shockwaves across space, and the sight of its disintegration was a testament to human determination and resilience. The flagship, which had once been a symbol of the Empire's dominance, was now a fiery ball of debris. Pieces of the colossal ship were torn apart by the explosion, creating a cascade of fire and destruction that lit up the battlefield. In the midst of the chaos, the vanguard remained cloaked, safely avoiding the debris. The crew aboard the ship watched in awe as the massive flagship continued to disintegrate. The shockwave from the explosion sent several nearby Imperial warships tumbling, and one by one, they were taken down by the sheer force of the blast. As the dust settled and the remnants of the Empire's flagship floated in space, there was a brief silence. The Empire had just lost their most powerful ship. Their military presence in the region was now severely weakened, and the scale of their loss was unimaginable. Captain Grant stood in the command center of the vanguard, her face set with a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. The crew around her was equally silent, as they absorbed the magnitude of their victory. The flagship was gone. The Empire had been dealt a blow they couldn't recover from. But despite the overwhelming success, the war wasn't over. The Empire still had a fleet, still had soldiers, and still had a relentless hunger for domination. The victory at the flagship was a turning point, but it was only the beginning of what would be an even greater battle. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they would never bow to tyranny. They would fight with everything they had. "We did it," Captain Grant said softly, almost in disbelief. "We've shown them that humanity is not to be underestimated." Her crew stood tall, knowing that they had made history. They had taken down the heart of the Empire, something no one thought was possible. This victory wasn't just about blowing up a ship, it was about proving that no matter how advanced or powerful the enemy, humanity's spirit could not be broken. As the remnants of the flagship drifted in space, the scene was a testament to the scale of the destruction. Pieces of the massive warship floated like wreckage, drifting in the void of space. Some parts were on fire, others were completely torn apart, their once pristine surface now scarred and broken. The remaining Imperial warships struggled to regroup, their commanders scrambling to make sense of the loss. The Empire's once unshakable control over the galaxy had been fractured in a single blow. The human resistance had proven that they could not only survive but thrive in the face of impossible odds. Captain Grant watched from the bridge of the Vanguard as the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in the war, humanity could finally see a glimmer of hope. "We fight on," Captain Grant said, her voice full of conviction. "And we win." The battle had been won. The Empire's flagship, the heart of their mighty fleet, was reduced to a fiery wreck, and several surrounding warships had been brought down in the wake of its destruction. The remaining Imperial forces scattered, disoriented and struggling to regroup. The humans had achieved what many thought impossible, but the victory came with a cost far greater than anyone had anticipated. As she walked to the command center, she felt the weight of her responsibility more than ever. She had to keep going. She had to lead. The loss of so many was heartbreaking, but it wasn't the end. It was only a moment in a much larger war. The memorial ceremony was brief, but it was powerful. The crew gathered in the command center, standing in silence as each person paid their respects. Captain Grant spoke only a few words, but they carried the weight of everything they had been through. She acknowledged the sacrifice of Bonner, Harris, Allen, and the others, remembering them as heroes who had given everything for humanity's survival. And though the crew mourned, they also knew the truth: the victory they had won on that day was just the beginning. The war was far from over. The Empire would not stop, and neither could they. The journey ahead would be long, filled with more battles, more losses, and more sacrifices. But for now, they had each other, and they had a chance to turn the tide. Captain Grant looked out into the stars, her heart heavy but her resolve stronger than ever. The war had taken so much, but it had also given humanity something precious: hope. And as long as they had that, they would continue to fight. "Rest in peace, Bonner," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We'll make sure your sacrifice was not in vain." The crew stood in silence, the stars beyond seeming to shine a little brighter. Humanity's moment of glory had come at a great cost, but it was a victory they would carry with them into the darkness of space, knowing that no matter how many battles they faced, they would never stop fighting for each other, and for the future of their kind. Vanguard drifted in space, its once pristine hull now scarred and battered from the intense battle. The ship's engines groaned, and the lights flickered. It was a reminder of just how hard the crew had fought, and how much they had sacrificed. The damage to the ship was severe, and the repairs would take time, but it was the loss of life that weighed most heavily on the minds of those who had survived. Inside the command center, Captain Alara Grant stood, staring out at the shattered remnants of the Empire's fleet. Her hands were clenched tightly on the railing, her knuckles white. Victory should have brought her relief, but all she could feel was the deep ache in her chest, the absence of those who had given their lives to make this triumph possible. "Captain." A voice broke her from her thoughts. Lieutenant Harlow, one of the senior officers aboard the Vanguard, stepped cautiously toward her. His face was pale, his eyes weary from the battle. "What is it, Lieutenant?" Captain Grant's voice was strained, her words quiet, almost as if speaking louder might shatter the fragile calm that had descended upon them. "The crew, they're asking about Bonner," Harlow said, his voice low. "They want to know what happened." Bonner. The name hit Captain Grant like a hammer. Sergeant Bonner had been with the Vanguard since the beginning. He was a seasoned soldier, dependable and brave, someone who had always been there when needed. His loss felt personal, like a piece of her had been torn away. "He gave his life to this mission," Captain Grant replied softly, her gaze fixed on the dark expanse of space beyond. "He died doing what we all swore to do, protect humanity." She could feel the weight of her words, but they did little to ease the pain in her heart. Bonner had been more than just a soldier, he was a friend, a brother in arms. His death was a stark reminder that the war they were fighting was not a game. People were dying. The price of victory was becoming increasingly clear. Captain Grant took a deep breath and turned toward Harlow. Tell them we honor his sacrifice. We'll carry on. But we do it for him, and for everyone else we've lost." Harlow nodded and walked away to relay the message to the rest of the crew. As he left, the weight of the captain's words hung heavy in the air. They had won, but at what cost? The screen showed the sky darkened by the Empire's warships. Ships of all sizes were bombarding the city. She could hear the distant explosions and see the fires that were spreading throughout the colony. She had no choice but to give orders to the remaining soldiers to fall back to the underground bunkers, hoping they could survive. But it was clear to Captain Grant that the battle was already lost. There was no hope of victory here. The Empire's fleet was too powerful, and the human forces on Astra 9 were too few. She had fought battles before, but this time, it felt different. This time, humanity was on the verge of being wiped out. As the last of the human defenses fell, the remaining soldiers began to retreat. Some of them fought bravely, holding the line as long as they could, but they were no match for the Empire's overwhelming power. Captain Grant ordered the final retreat, hoping that at least some of the civilians would make it to the underground bunkers. But as the final ships of the Empire landed and the robotic soldiers marched through the streets, it felt like the end. She knew it wasn't just Astra 9 that was in danger, the entire human race was at risk. The Empire's victory here would signal the beginning of the end for humanity. There was no way the humans could fight back against the might of the Empire. Or so it seemed. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, something incredible happened. Out of nowhere, a ship appeared. It was a small vessel, nothing like the enormous warships of the Empire. But it was unlike any human ship Captain Grant had ever seen. It appeared on the radar, then vanished again, cloaked by some form of technology that was impossible to detect. It moved with incredible speed, darting between the massive warships of the Empire like a shadow. The ship was a ghost, invisible to the Empire's sensors, and moving with a grace that made it seem almost unreal. It was the Vanguard. Captain Grant's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors of the ship, of its existence in secret military projects, but she never believed it would actually appear when humanity needed it most. The Vanguard had been thought to be lost in a previous battle, its crew sacrificed for the good of humanity. But now, this ghost ship had returned. The Vanguard's technology was beyond anything humanity had ever built. Its cloaking device made it invisible to the Empire's advanced sensors, and its weapons were devastating. It fired blasts that tore through the Empire's warships, sending them spiraling out of control and crashing to the ground. In moments, the Vanguard had taken out two of the massive warships, their hulking forms falling to the surface in fiery explosions. The humans on the ground could hardly believe their eyes. The ship was a symbol of hope, a beacon that signaled humanity was not yet defeated. The Empire's fleet, which had seemed unbeatable just moments ago, was now in disarray. The robotic soldiers hesitated, unsure of how to respond to this unexpected threat. Captain Grant could hardly believe what she was seeing. The Empire had underestimated humanity once again. The Vanguard had given them a chance, a glimmer of hope that victory was still possible. With the Vanguard in the sky, the remaining human soldiers took a breath. It wasn't over yet, the Empire's fleet was still large, and the battle would be long. But now, for the first time in hours, there was a chance for victory. The humans were no longer completely helpless. They had something the Empire did not, the ingenuity, the courage, and the spirit of humanity. Outside, the visual spectacle was breathtaking. The flagship, once a symbol of the Empire's power, was now a fireball of destruction. Massive explosions tore through the ship, sending debris flying in every direction. Ships nearby were also caught in the blast, torn apart by the chain reaction. The Empire's fleet was thrown into disarray as their flagship was reduced to nothing but smoldering wreckage. As the destruction unfolded, the crew aboard the Vanguard watched from their cloaked position. The sight was both horrifying and awe-inspiring. The flagship had been the Empire's pride, its most powerful vessel. But now, in a moment of human ingenuity and courage, it was no more. For a moment, everything was silent. The flagship was gone, and with it, the Empire's greatest weapon. The crew of the Vanguard stood in stunned silence as the reality of their success hit them. They had done the impossible. They had taken down the heart of the Empire. But the war wasn't over. The Empire still had its fleet, and the road ahead was uncertain. But this victory was a moment of glory for humanity. It was proof that no matter how advanced the enemy, no matter how overwhelming the odds, humanity could rise above. The destruction of the flagship sent a shockwave through the Empire. It was the kind of blow they had never expected. And it was a message to every soldier, every citizen, every leader within the Empire: humanity was not done yet. As the Vanguard flew away from the wreckage, its crew looked back at the fiery remains of the flagship. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, but humanity had proven something that day: they would never give up. Captain Grant turned to her crew, her voice filled with pride and hope. "We've just shown the galaxy that we are not the underdogs. We are humanity. And we fight with everything we have." The space around the Empire's flagship was eerily quiet, save for the constant hum of the Vanguard's engines. Captain Alara Grant stood at the helm, her hands steady as she looked out toward the Empire's most formidable ship. She knew what was at stake. This mission wasn't just about a victory, it was about sending a message to the entire galaxy that humanity, despite being outmatched, would never give up. After months of intense battles and mounting pressure, the time had come to face the Empire's might head-on. The Vanguard had already taken down dozens of Empire warships, but the flagship remained. It was the heart of their military force, and its destruction could change the course of the war forever. The Empire's flagship loomed large on the screen, its hulking presence dominating the battlefield. Massive gun turrets lined its surface, shields glowing with powerful energy. Surrounding it were countless warships, all heavily armed and prepared for anything. But what they weren't prepared for was the human ingenuity about to unfold. "We're cloaked," Captain Grant said calmly, as she prepared to lead her crew into the heart of the enemy stronghold. "Get ready. This is our chance." The crew aboard the Vanguard had trained for this moment for months, running countless simulations and preparing for every possible scenario. The flagship was a fortress, brimming with defensive technologies and thousands of Imperial soldiers. If they were going to succeed, they had to be quick, quiet, and precise. Astra 9 was a world of peace. Situated on the outer rim of the galaxy, the small human colony thrived in its isolated corner of the universe. Rolling hills stretched into the horizon, dotted with green fields and sparkling rivers. The cities were quiet, modern, but far removed from the political chaos of the galaxy. Humans here had built a home, free from the oppressive rule of the Galactic Empire. They lived simply, working together to create a life untouched by the brutal conflicts that raged across other worlds. But peace, as it always does, came at a price. Without warning, the calm of Astra 9 was shattered. The sky, once a clear and tranquil blue, was torn apart by the thundering roar of massive warships descending from the heavens. The Galactic Empire's elite fleet had arrived, and with them came destruction. The fleet was enormous, a monstrous armada that seemed to stretch across the sky, blocking out the sun. Warships, hundreds of them, glided through the atmosphere with eerie precision. Each ship was a fortress, massive and unyielding, brimming with technology beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. They were the pride of the Empire, AI-controlled warships with advanced cloaking systems, each one carrying legions of robotic soldiers programmed to crush any resistance. At the command of Admiral Creel, the elite forces of the Empire began their descent toward the surface. They had one goal: to wipe out the human colony once and for all. The Empire viewed humanity as insignificant, an obstacle standing in the way of their expansion, and they would not hesitate to eliminate it. Their assault was swift and merciless. The residents of Astra 9 barely had time to react. Alarms blared across the colony's communications network as the sky darkened with the shadow of enemy ships. People scrambled for shelter, their faces filled with terror. Civilians ran through the streets, seeking refuge in underground bunkers, while soldiers at the colony's defense posts prepared for an inevitable fight. The first bombardment hit before anyone could comprehend what was happening. Massive energy blasts streaked down from the Empire's warships, slamming into the surface with terrifying force. Buildings crumbled into dust. Fields were scorched, leaving nothing but blackened earth in their wake. The colony's defenses, a modest collection of laser cannons and shield generators, were immediately overwhelmed by the Empire's superior firepower. It was hopeless. On the ground, Captain Alara Grant, a veteran of previous conflicts, stood on the balcony of the command center, watching as the Empire's forces unleashed their fury. Her heart sank, but she refused to show fear. She had seen this kind of destruction before, and it never failed to shake her. The people of Astra 9 were unprepared, and their only hope lay in the hands of the few soldiers still fighting back. Captain Grant had lost everything to the Empire once before, her family, her home, her friends, but this time, she would not let the same fate befall the people of Astra 9. The Empire was relentless. The warships hovered in the atmosphere, sending down a steady barrage of fire. Captain Grant ordered the defense cannons to fire back, but the weapons were ineffective. The Empire's warships were too powerful, their shields too strong, their weapons too precise. The humans were outmatched, and they knew it. A flicker of hope, the Vanguard. As the last defenses fell, the colony's remaining soldiers and civilians retreated into bunkers, praying for survival. But just when all seemed lost, something extraordinary happened. The corridors of the Vanguard were eerily silent as the crew moved in somber unity. The celebrations that might have followed such a victory were absent. There was no music, no shouting or cheering. Instead, there was a quiet reverence for the fallen, an understanding that this was not a time for exuberance. Captain Grant walked slowly through the ship, her mind heavy with memories of the battle. She passed the crew quarters, where she saw faces etched with exhaustion and sorrow. Some were sitting, heads in their hands, trying to come to terms with the loss of their friends. Others were standing near the memorial wall, where names of those who had fallen were inscribed. Bonner's name had already been added, the fresh engraving a stark reminder of his sacrifice. Grant paused for a moment in front of the memorial, her hand hovering over Bonner's name. She could almost hear his voice, his laughter, his encouragement. He had always been the one to lift the spirits of the crew, even in the darkest of times. To think that he was gone now was nearly unbearable. She closed her eyes, remembering his final moments. He had fought valiantly until the very end, holding back the enemy's robotic forces to allow the rest of the team to plant the explosives on the flagship's reactor. His courage had been unquestionable. Yet, in the end, even his bravery couldn't save him from the brutal reality of war. As Grant stood there, the memories of Bonner and the others began to flood her mind. She thought of Lieutenant Harris, who had also fallen in the battle, his body found near the reactor, still clutching his weapon. She thought of Private Allen, whose youthful face would never grow old, and Corporal Vasquez, who had died protecting the rear while the others made their escape. Each loss hit her like a personal blow, and each one added to the growing weight on her shoulders. The crew had fought for victory, but the cost was becoming harder to ignore. They were losing people they couldn't afford to lose. And though they had achieved an incredible victory by taking down the Empire's flagship, they knew the war was far from over. Captain Grant had always known that leading the resistance came with sacrifices, but she hadn't fully understood the emotional toll it would take. She had heard stories from others about the cost of war, about the pain of losing comrades, about the guilt of surviving when others hadn't. But hearing those stories was different from living them. She had always thought that if they won, if they took down the Empire's fleet and secured humanity's future, it would be enough to make the pain of loss worth it. But now, standing in the quiet corridors of the Vanguard, she realized that no victory could ever replace the people they had lost. No amount of triumph would ever ease the ache in her heart. "Captain," Lieutenant Harlow's voice called again, this time from the doorway. "The crew's ready for a memorial. They want to honor Bonner and the others." Grant nodded slowly. "Let's do it. We'll honor them the only way we know how, by continuing this fight. For Bonner. For all of them." "We're going in," Captain Grant said, her voice steady but filled with determination. The crew of the Vanguard was ready. They had fought through wave after wave of Empire forces, but now, they had to do what seemed impossible. They would infiltrate the heart of the enemy's flagship, sabotage it, and bring it down from the inside. The key to the plan was the cloaking technology aboard the Vanguard. Using this advanced device, the ship could blend into its surroundings, making it invisible to even the most advanced sensors. But the flagship's defenses were formidable. Getting close enough to sabotage it would require precise timing and expert maneuvering. Any mistake could mean certain death for the crew. "We're cloaked. Moving in now," Captain Grant ordered. As the crew activated the cloaking device, the Vanguard disappeared from sight. The massive flagship loomed ahead, its shields shimmering with energy. It was a fortress, surrounded by multiple layers of defense. But Captain Grant trusted her crew's ingenuity. They had pulled off impossible feats before. This would be no different. Inside the flagship, the Empire's elite soldiers were unaware of the approaching human ship. Their focus was on the Vanguard's other attacks, thinking that it was still hiding in the debris field. Little did they know, humanity had come to strike at the heart of the Empire itself. The Vanguard glided silently toward the flagship, evading the sensors and defenses with remarkable skill. The crew aboard the Vanguard worked with precision, their every move calculated. The moment they entered the flagship's docking bay, the mission would begin. Once inside, Captain Grant and her team of elite soldiers moved quickly. They had to get to the flagship's main reactor before they were discovered. The plan was simple: sabotage the reactor, cause an explosion that would cripple the flagship, and take down the Empire's pride in one blow. But executing it would be anything but easy. The corridors of the flagship were a maze of steel and cold, with robotic soldiers patrolling every corner. The crew of the Vanguard was quick and quiet, using advanced tools to disable the security systems and avoid detection. Each step was crucial, and there was no room for error. If they were caught, the flagship would sound the alarm, and the entire mission would fail. As they neared the reactor core, the tension grew. They could feel the weight of the mission pressing on them. This was it. If they succeeded, they would bring down the mightiest warship the Empire had ever built. If they failed, humanity's fight would be over. Captain Grant's heart raced as they reached the reactor room. The Empire had placed all their security measures here, and the entrance was guarded by dozens of robotic soldiers. But humanity had something the Empire couldn't account for: a fierce determination to survive. With a few well-placed shots, the guards fell. The crew rushed into the reactor room, where the central power core hummed with energy. Grant's hands were steady as she placed the explosive charges on the reactor's core. She glanced at her crew one last time before hitting the detonator. The explosion was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The core of the flagship detonated with a blinding flash of light, sending shockwaves through the ship. The energy release was so massive that it tore through the flagship's hull, ripping it apart from the inside out. The massive structure shook as parts of it were violently thrown into space.